in studio. Currently, what we are witnessing in the country is this tension almost in every major town. Right now, we do understand that the government has actually closed schools in Nairobi and Mombasa because of the protests that are expected to be happening tomorrow. Now, the Azimio team has actually, called for this particular protest and said we are going to go for 3 days rather. And before we get into this conversation, I just want to take you through some facts and figures. But first, all right, now the number of protests that we've had that have been very intense. We are talking about the Sabasaba, that is the 7th of July. We've actually had one that was, last Wednesday, and that is the 12th of July. Right now, Azimio is calling for 3 more protests. That is from Wednesday, Thursday, all the way to Friday. The government is saying it will not allow that to happen, and it has put down measures to ensure that these protests do not occur. All right, as far as deaths are concerned, we have more than 20 actually people that have been reported dead, and injuries quite a number. We've seen those particular pictures of people in hospital that have been injured while out there demonstrating. Some have been, nursing gunshots, and those is what will be forming the basis of our conversation tonight. We've seen destruction of property, the latest being the Eastmart supermarket in Kitengela, and also the expressway, which the government did say is going to cost them 700 million shillings to get to repair that, and also effects on business. The Kenya Private Businesses Association does say that 3 billion is lost in a day when we do have this maandamano. So that is 3 billion shillings. So if you're going to have protests on Wednesday, Thursday and Friday, we could see close to 9 billion shillings being lost when it comes to matters revenue. And also, why are people demonstrating? The high cost of living, punitive taxes, and also the opposition is saying electoral reforms and the selection of the IEBC. All right, I do want to engage my guests here in studio. Joining us online, I beg your pardon, I have my guest in studio joining us online for this particular conversation. I'll be speaking to Achengo Sogo, who is a governance expert, and also Otieno Namwaya, who is the East Africa Director, Human Rights Watch. I don't know if you can get me. Are you there? Let me start with you, Acheng.
Yes, we are.
Thank you so much. All right, I want us to have this conversation based on just what I've read and what is happening in the country as we speak. Where would you place us when we say, let's take a look at the state of the nation? Where would you place us? Let me start with you, Acheng.
I'm not clear what exactly you want to know in terms of where I would place us, but I think we are at a point where we need to talk with each other, because there definitely is something ailing us, and the chest thumping that's going around, and everyone trying to outsmart, the two parties trying to outsmart each other in terms of who's going to blink first. I think that's a very bad place to be as a country, and we need to have a conversation. It's a bit late, but not quite. We needed to have started this before. We should never have let it get to this point. We just needed to talk about it. I think there have been lots of calls, but unfortunately nobody wants to appear like the weaker person. Being politics, you want to be the one who carried the day. I think that's the greatest challenge we have right now. Everyone wants to be the one who carried the day, and this idea of being the bigger man, being the one who climbs down, does not apply in our context. Unfortunately, as you see, we are losing money. As you said, KEPSA puts it at 3 billion. That means 9 billion. The expressway, there have been all sorts of clips on social media. I don't know how true they are, about cops going to guard the expressway. And there was someone, a business person from Kitengela, who last week said that the people who caused chaos in Kitengela were not from Kitengela. Okay. They were literally ferried there. Right. So we do not even know what we are dealing with. As ordinary citizens, it is not clear to us what exactly it is we are dealing with. Is it the Azimio side who have mobilized,
Or is it the government?
Is it government who's bringing people to paint the azimio side in bad light?
All right.
So I think we are not in a very good place. We actually need to just stop and talk with each other, because at the end of it, hakuna kuhama Kenya. This is our home.
Kenya ni
So
yetu.
we must find a way to make it work for all of us.
All right. Now, let me engage Otieno. Otieno Namwaya, thank you so much for making time for this conversation. He is the East Africa Director for Human Rights Watch. You deal with these issues. And let me just come to you from the question that I've asked Achieng Osogo is, from where you sit, when you look at the country, how would you describe this situation right now as you speak?
Thank you, Brian. Let me start by saying that protests are a legitimate form of expression, and they are recognized in both Kenyan law and international law that Kenya has recognized in the country. So if you look at Kenyan law very keenly, people do not need permission from the police or any politician to protest. And it does not require Raila to call the protest or to go to the streets. People have the right to picket as a form of expression to get the authorities, the people they have elected, people who are in power, to respond to their grievances. So through these protests that we are seeing, people are actually communicating to the government about what is wrong in the country. And the government needs to listen. It's not a question of Raila versus RUTO. It's a question of people communicating to the national leaders about what they think ought to be addressed, what is wrong with the country. And for the leadership, I think the way they have taken the issue of protest is totally out of context, and it is a total mischaracterization of what protests are and what they are supposed to be. I've seen even the letter they have written to the UN Office of the High Commission on Human Rights, where they are describing protesters as extremist opposition factions. Extremist opposition factions is a terrorist language, and I think that is totally unfortunate.
Okay.
What ought to happen is that the government needs to begin to listen and respond to people's grievances. A government that is non-responsive definitely attracts a lot more protests than we are seeing today.
Okay. Now, let me come to you, Achieng. In terms of the thing, okay, you know, the leaders, especially government officials, you know, looking at protesters and labeling them terrorists, you know, at the same time, and how they get to respond to these particular issues that Kenyans are raising on the ground. How do we describe this? Is this the best way to go about it?
You know, thanks. And the challenge that I see there, I think this was also picked by Krigler, is that whatever situation we find ourselves in, whenever politicians come in, they look at everything with a political lens, and it is about political gains and political losses. So those in government are looking at protesters without listening to whatever issues they are raising, because they're inside. Anyone who raises a dissenting voice is seen as pro-Raila. And on the other hand, for Raila, anyone who appears to support is seen as pro-Kenya Kwanza. Now, in looking at things that way, we do not listen to each other. So is the government even aware of the issues we are raising, the concerns we are raising, what ails us as a people? Right now, everyone is complaining about the cost of fuel. It doesn't matter who you voted for. As long as you're living in this country within the boundaries of Kenya, you're paying dearly for fuel, irrespective of what the matter being in court. Right now, sugar, the other day, I actually went to a shop, and I was surprised that from shops, 2 kg pack of sugar is 520. I was wondering how much it goes for in a supermarket, but from a shop, I paid 500 and they asked for 20 shillings. It doesn't matter who I voted for.
Okay.
But is the government interested in this? They're only keen on, if you raise a dissenting voice, then you are you're anti-government. Wamushomba from Kiambu, tried to dissent. What happened? They held big functions in her backyard and excluded her. Not because she did anything wrong. She actually spoke for her people, having consulted her people, and we had recordings of her speaking to her people and her people telling her not to vote for the finance bill then. But the government is not keen on that. And they have been asked, I think, by a number of people have spoken to them and told them to at least choose someone they could listen to. We saw people when they were conducting public participation, a number of people went, very many groups, very many organizations, I think over 1,000, went and presented their views. And I think about 90% were against the bill as it was at that time. Did they listen? No. Why? Because if you're opposing, you're on the other side. And they said the government never failed. So for them, it is about the government and those who are outside the government. So anything they want to do, it doesn't matter the impact that which they want to do has on the citizenry, they will do it because it is what they want to do, and they can because they're in government, or at least they think they can.
So Otieno, let me engage you.
So Kenyans are basically just venting out, expressing their frustration on everything they're dealing with, you know, on having been given an opportunity to give their views, and then their views were not taken into consideration. So it is all these things put together that you see now people spilling out there. And I agree that it is now, I think it's moving past Raila and Raila and Ruto, and getting to a point where the citizens are taking over because people are equally pained out there. So even if they say do not, it will not amount to a reduction in the cost of living, an immediate reduction. Benefits will not be enjoyed immediately. You know, unemployment has risen as a result of this finance bill, this finance act that we now have, you know, because if the employers that feel they might not have the capacity to pay the 1.5%, for example, so they'd rather lay off. So it is, everyone is paid everywhere. Unfortunately for us, we are looking at it politically. Am I on the right side? Am I on the wrong side?
All right. Let me come to Otieno, and she mentions something important and say people are pained and will take to the street to air their grievances. The Constitution does provide for that. When it comes to rights, you have a right to picket, you know, demonstrate. But on this particular one, people are torn in between. People are like, okay, if you're going to demonstrate, why then should we have you destroying property and all that? And I've had conversations in regards to, you know, even destruction of property, vandalism is a way of people communicating. But in terms of right, how do we balance this so that we say when the CS of Interior stands up and says your right to picket stops where mine is affected? So how do we get to balance this? What's the right way to express this right to picket?
I'll say a few things. One, that first, like I said, the government needs to recognize that picketing is a form of expression, a legitimate one that is recognized in law. From the sentiments and declarations I'm seeing in government and senior government officials, they are behaving like they don't recognize it or they don't know about it. Two, is for people in government to understand what that expression is about. What are people trying to say? And then find ways of responding to it. Then three, what government needs to do then is that when people begin to express themselves that way, is to understand how legitimately still and lawfully to respond to that form of expression, which is protesting. What we have seen from the protests we saw last week and the other Friday, Saba, is that the government does not go does not send police to go and manage the protests and facilitate protesters to express themselves in a legitimate way. They go there not even to control, but to disperse and basically delegitimize the protests and dismiss and subdue. And I think it is in that approach that we are beginning to see, or we have been seeing, a lot of people being killed by the police, people being beaten to death, people being shot. A lot of the people, this is actually not the first time we are seeing these protests. We saw them in March, we saw them in April, we saw them in May. And at least for the March, May, and April ones, we did manage to do a thorough investigation, and we did find that quite a number of the people who were shot by the police were not even protesters. Police were actually firing tear gas and live bullets in people's houses. That is not containment of protests. That's going out to subdue a neighborhood or a people without necessarily going out to deal with the protests. And I think that is a difficult question for government to be able to respond to. Then the fourth and final question that I want to raise that I think needs to be also handled very carefully is the issue of violence. The issue of violence and the killings and the deaths. I've seen the way this issue is being communicated in political rallies is that the organizers of the protests need to take responsibility for the deaths. And that's a very unfortunate way of looking at it, because there are two issues there. One is the deaths, two is the issue of destruction of property. The deaths, it's a very simple thing. The law is very clear on what process needs to be undertaken when a death occurs. Investigations need to happen. The agencies that need to do the investigations are known. One is the police themselves. Two is IPOA if the police are involved in the killings. Then three, of course, there is the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, which is a government agency. These institutions need to begin to do investigations and hold the police, if they're the ones who did the killings, accountable. From the research that we did in March and May and April and May, we found that in fact it is the police who did the killing in those protests. Then there's the issue of protests. So the destruction of property. Okay. Destruction of property is also an issue that speaks to how police handle protests. If you look at most of those riot demonstrations, they have turned chaotic only when police begin throwing tear gas at people. Before police do that, the demonstrations are largely peaceful. In Kitengela that people talk about, I was actually there. In Mulolongo that people talk about, I was actually there. And what happened in Kitengela is that about 5 people carried twigs and started walking on the road, saying they're protesting against the high cost of living. And they did that for about 10 minutes. They were joined by other people, and the crowd swelled to about 50 people, and the OCS of Kitengela came and threw tear gas at those people, and that's when chaos broke. And so, that is the pattern across the country. Because when chaos break, what is supposed to happen? There are cases where we have heard that there were people who were hired, and those people basically came, caused destruction, and left. We don't know who hired them. But there are cases where there are people then begin to vent their anger against the police. And in that process of destruction, because people are venting their anger against the police, is also another legitimate form of expression. Okay. However, where deaths and destruction have happened, other than begin to politicize that and blaming each other for it, investigations need to happen. And that's an accountability question. Okay. So if you look at the pattern of killings or deaths around protests in this country since 2016, 2013, 2017, 2022, even during the corona period 2020, no one has been taken to court or charged for killings around protests. Okay. It's like deaths or police killings around protests are now becoming a legitimate way of responding to protests.
All right, this brings me to a question that I want to ask then, because we've been seeing different political leaders, blame game. Who then takes responsibility for the death that we've witnessed? Because if you ask the government side, they'll say the opposition needs to take responsibility for the lives lost. The opposition will say, we need to see the government take responsibility because it is the police that did shoot these people. So who then takes responsibility?
I think there's some utterances I've seen coming from people in government that are basically unfortunate, because there's a reason why there's a government, and government has legitimate instruments of violence. They control the police, they control the military, they control the Kenya Wildlife Service, they control all instruments of violence. They have them. And therefore, governments have this, the assumption is that because they are voted in, they are ruling on behalf of the people, they have the legitimacy and the mandate to protect people and uphold the law, protect people, uphold the law, and also do whatever is necessary to ensure that there are good policies in place to ensure that governance takes place. So in this case where deaths have happened, there is only one legitimate force that is that we expect to move in to investigate. By responsibility, we mean who did the killing. So when the legitimate forces move in to investigate, they are trying to establish culpability, who killed. Once they establish who killed, that person takes the responsibility and is taken to court and charged. It's not a question, it's not a political rally, it's not a question for contest in political rallies. It's a very straightforward issue to me. So if the government thinks that the opposition did the killing, let them investigate and do the necessary. If it is the police who did the killing, let the government allow the investigations to happen. Why have these killings been happening in Kenya during protests? In 2017, police were saying they killed about 12, but when we did our documentation, we found a total of about 104 people had been killed. Out of those 104, how many cases do you know where somebody has been charged in court? No one. In 2016, during the anti-IEBC protests, how many people were killed? In Siaya, in Kisumu, in Nairobi? More than 16 people were killed. Right. Have you had anybody go to court? No. This year alone, in March, April, May, we documented 16. We have not yet done research for what happened the last 3 demonstrations, and we don't know what will happen starting tomorrow. We don't know how many people will die. So what we need right now is accountability for those killings, not politics.
Let me engage Acheng on this one, because from what you've mentioned, you're talking about nobody going to court, nobody being arrested. No, even when investigations are done, the government is not taking them seriously, and also the blame game that we're actually seeing. The opposition throwing it to the government throwing it to the opposition. We do understand when it comes to rights, Acheng, it is provided for in the Constitution that you have a right to picket. You have a right to show your dissatisfaction with the government or whichever agency. And also, at the end of it, you need to be provided with security. But this security that we are seeing being provided is not security to protect lives and properties from being destroyed. It is actually causing more harm than it's supposed to, when it's supposed to actually to be good to the people that are actually taking to the streets. So, talk to me about this use of force from police officers to an extent that we are actually seeing live bullets being used to disperse these protesters, that some of them end up dead and others nursing gunshot wounds.
And quite a number of things are going through my mind right now as you were asking that. And I was thinking of, if you attempt suicide, and you're not successful, you're actually charged for attempting to take your life. And the person who charges you is the government, because your life is assumed to belong to the government. It is not yours to do with as you please, But on this one, when people die, the government is not very keen on finding out the circumstances or charging you. It would appear they wait for the death to happen and then sort of wish it away. Now, it is, as an ordinary citizen, it is my responsibility to, look after my life. Just mine. As long as I don't go shooting and killing you, I look after mine. The person whose responsibility it is to jointly look after us is the government. I have no responsibility over you. You have no responsibility over me. Government has responsibility over all of us. The police are utumishi kwa wote for a good reason. You know, they're supposed to actually serve all of us, whether they like us or not. Actually, not just police, uniformed officers. And I think that's why for the longest time, they never even would vote, you know, because then it would mean they are partisan, they're taking sides. What happens if your person loses? Ideally, you should just be there waiting to work for the government of the day that works. For you, that's it. It doesn't matter. They were expected to be neutral, you know. So really, it is the responsibility of the government. They should ensure they provide a conducive environment. When people are picketing, when people come together, naturally, there's likely to be mob psychology in case danger is sensed, you know. When people are running, the police throw a tear gas, lob a tear gas canister at you. It won't matter this is somebody's shop. It will not matter who is in front of you. At that point, it is about survival for you. And I think that is the point at which you experience damage to property and things like those. Remember was it last week when Prime Minister Raila Odinga went into town, unexpected, nobody knew he was going to go. He just went, took a matatu, addressed people peacefully. Nobody tried to do anything, and there was no distraction to property. He did his thing, finished, went home. No distraction to property. Businesses were not closed. There was not a single death reported on that day. On these others that are reported, that are announced and prepared for, people prepare themselves for, it seems to be a different conversation. The agenda seems to be totally different from also just expressing ourselves.
Let me.
Maybe it will also be important to just have an understanding of what really goes in the mind of the organizers also, you know, because they organize the peaceful one.
All
you
right.
know, yes, I agree. The other one, there was no police, and that's why it was peaceful, and it was also beautiful. If you saw last week, people were, when the transport sector was involved, was part of the demonstration, and they were playing soccer at the bus parks, you know. That's a form of demonstration, you know. Normally, that is a place that is supposed to be used for transport, but they decided that on that day, they wanted to send across a message that today it is not business as usual. We are going to have fun.
Okay.
Did businesses suffer? Of course, businesses suffered because people were not able to go to work and all that. But was property destroyed when people were just playing soccer? Not really. The planning then was different. But when again the police came in, I think to stop a number of Akina Matakarua, and I think, was it Munya? Again, you saw violence. So it is just people trying to push for their space. People just trying to make sure that they're allowed to express that which they believe, that which is given to them by the Constitution, and that which the police and the government seems to think they are abusing. But are they really abusing? Maybe the thing to also understand there is who's getting into the other space.
Okay.
Is the government getting into the space of the civilians, or are the civilians getting into the space of government?
All right.
Remember, as I said earlier, government is looking at it in terms of political gains and political losses. They're in power. The citizens are looking at the government at this moment as the oppressor. Now, the oppressor, of course, will fight. If they feel that the oppressed want to, get a bit to lift, to get a bit to rise a bit, they will fight. There will be resistance. And I don't know which wise man said the logic of the oppressed and the logic of the oppressor can never be the same as long as the oppressed want to be free. Okay. Unfortunately, right now, the oppressed and the oppressor are acting in the exact same way. So I don't know who will blink first. But in the process, we are losing lives, we are losing property, and as you can see, there's a lot of damage to the economy.
All right. Now, there's this question that I want to pose to you just a few seconds, Aching, in terms of, because there's been conversation in regards to relooking at Article 37, whereby we get to relook at it and, twist it in a way that makes the person that is organizing the protest be liable to any destruction of property or life that will be seen or will be as a result of this particular protest. What do you make of that? Because we've seen that conversation happening from the government side, and even the president hinting at it, that Article 37 should actually be looked at again.
I think government is doing that just to make it painful and to make it difficult for anyone who thinks who would imagine they would want to organize a protest. When people are going out to protest, they're not happy. People are venting. People are trying to communicate. People go to protest because they have tried other means. They have tried doing memorandums, they have tried having conversations, dialogue has failed, everything has failed, and people have got to a point where they think if they go out to the streets and shout, they will be heard. Because I cannot walk to State House, for example, to talk to the presidency. I cannot, the security, the beating I would get. So what do? I gather a number of people, we form a crowd, and we express ourselves and become newsworthy for the powers that be to hear us out.
Okay.
So now if the police come and attack us while we are at it, how do you want to then place it on me? Really, I do not understand how that then becomes my responsibility. Because usually, again, as people protest, angry as they usually are, they tend to be peaceful until attacked.
All right.
By the police. Again, back to the example where Raila took a matatu to town.
All right.
It was peaceful.
All right.
They were not attacked.
Okay.
So if you want to now say that because Raila called for demonstrations, because Raila told Kenyans to exercise the powers given to them, their sovereignty, that you now want him to pay because the police came and dispersed crowds, lobbed tear gases at people, shot at people in their houses. What logic is there? I really do not understand, except that they want to make it painful and expensive and difficult for anyone to ever imagine of organizing a demo in this country.
Okay.
And it is just comfortable because they are in power now.
All right.
I wish it was possible to make laws for posterity. I wish you were in a place where you make laws, but they are not effected during your term. They're effected during the following term, so that you're able to just have a moment to internalize the implications of the laws you want to put in place. Because right now, I can tell you, the only reason that proposal is on the table is just to punish azimio. And just to weaken azimio, not for the good of Kenyans.
All right. Let me come to, because I'm running out of time and I will need to wind up on this conversation. Otieno, let me ask this question, because from what you've told us and the investigations that you've done, the one constant factor that actually, is here is the police. Most of the time is, when they do not engage, we might not see what we normally see. Then how do we go about ensuring, should they be deployed? Or when they get to be deployed, they should not engage when it comes to, dispersing the protesters and just let people do what they want to do and go back home at the end of the day?
No. That is not what we have said. There's quite a lot that I can say, so I don't know how much time you're going to give me. I want to tell you what is wrong with the way police conduct themselves during protests. By first telling you what they ought to be doing. So the first step is usually when people go to notify the police that they want to have a protest or a demonstration, whatever you want to call it. That's the point at which the Kenya police begin to go wrong. It's at that point that the Kenya police are supposed to engage the organizers of the demonstrations or protests to agree on a plan of action and the policing and the protection that they will need. But what has happened with the Kenya police is that they receive that notification and either dismiss it, or like I saw the Central Police OCS do, deny ever receiving it, or like we have seen Koome trying to do, claim that he's banning the protests. He doesn't have that authority.
So what the protesters
once they agree
need to do
on the plan of the protest plan and the type of security the protesters will need, then when they deploy, their focus should not be on controlling or dispersing people. It should be on managing the protest and facilitating the protest.
Okay. What
that means is that you provide security, you can have people on bicycles. A lot of times when police are on bicycles, actually they're non-threatening and people tend to receive them well. And talk to people well, show that you are fair. When police demonstrate to the protesters that they are fair in their judgment and decision, and they're guided by the law, people actually respect them and listen to them. Instead, what happens is that police come to show force and power and dominance. Secondly, in any crowd of people where there are protests, there are different categories of people. There are those who come to legitimately protest and follow the law and then finish the protest and go. There are those who come to simply take advantage and break the law, either by stealing or robbing shops or mugging people. That is why the protesters need security.
Okay.
So usually police are expected to focus on the small groups of people or individuals who are breaking the law on the sides, not the main group that is protesting.
Okay.
And when police are to use tear gas, they are supposed to not throw the tear gas in the main group that is protesting. They're supposed to use it only when necessary to protect life or to protect themselves, or to disperse a small group of people elsewhere that does not necessarily distract the protests.
Okay.
What Kenya police do, they come, they don't issue warning, they don't bother to provide security, they don't even go after the people who are breaking the law. They come and throw tear gas in the middle of the people.
Okay.
And before people realize, they are using live bullets on the people. That's where things begin to go wrong.
Okay.
So even when we talk about
let me just throw this to you.
Or destroying property, it is a failure of the police to provide security.
Okay, now let me throw this to you in terms of are we looking at a possibility of where this conversation is going to be a national conversation and have police act accordingly as opposed to what we normally see?
Police are supposed to be trained, and I believe Kenya police are trained. I think it is the mentality and the culture that is totally wrong in the Kenya police, because they think that everything is supposed to be dealt with a hammer. And the matters are not helped by the kind of narrative that we see in the political leadership who have basically decided to talk as though people who are protesting are actually criminals.
All right.
What ought to happen is that police, if they don't have adequate training on policing protests, they need to be provided with training. I believe they do. They are supposed to be equipped. I've heard people saying, oh, protesters are throwing stones. Stones is not a justification for using live bullets.
Okay.
There's a reason why police are equipped for handling protests.
All right.
They have adequate gear. They are provided with helmets, they are provided with these shields, they are provided with everything, including the tear gas.
Okay.
So what ought to happen is that police need to follow the law, and there's actually the policing protests and the guidelines on policing protests is a very standard thing, and it is not something that police can claim they don't know. What we need is for politicians to stop this hostile rhetoric where they characterize others as enemies, terrorists, and bandits who need to be dealt with.
Okay.
I think protests are legitimate in Kenya.
All right. And I'll take that as your final remarks. Let me come to you, Achieng, for your bottom line. What is the bottom line? What are your final remarks on this conversation as far as human rights and protests are concerned in the country moving forward? We are also expecting more tomorrow and, Thursday and also Friday. Achieng?
Oh, was that for me?
Yeah, that was for you.
I think
as we wind up.
Even as we talk about human rights, I wish we could have a conversation as a country. I wish we could talk with each other. This has solved a number of issues for us before. It never really needs to get to the point where we now kill each other because we are trying to prove a point, because somebody is exercising their rights, and we really do not need to get to this point.
Okay.
The rights are clear. Right to life is clear. Nobody, absolutely nobody should take away the other's life, irrespective of what they have done. You know, even if you are caught killing another, we don't kill you in return, you know? So really, at that very basic, I think we should be able to just look for other alternatives to address our issues.
All right.
Let us talk with each other. And when people exercise constitutionally given freedoms and rights in this country, allow them to be. We have come a long way. We are now under a new dispensation. Whether we like it or not, it is where we are. And the new dispensation is very strong, is very loud on human rights.
All right.
And how they should be protected.
Okay.
I think it is only fair to do so. When an oath of office was taken, it is clear who took oath of office.
All right.
They should honor it.
Okay.
They should protect lives.
All right.
After all, who votes? It is the people who will vote.
Okay.
So protect their lives, ensure they stay alive to take you through in the next election.
All right. Thank you so much, Achieng. Protect a life. I think that's a better place to end this conversation there. Thank you so much. I do appreciate Achieng Osogo, governance expert. Thank you so much for your time joining us from Nakuru, and Otieno Namwaya who is the East Africa Director, Human Rights Watch. I do thank you guys for your time and making time for this conversation tonight. We've been talking about human rights and protests, and I just want to take you through some of the facts and figures too. This is tomorrow's protest. If it goes on, it will be the third protest. And the number of deaths so far that have been recorded, 20, and 20 injuries that we've had quite a number. Destruction of property. We talked about the expressway and also looked at what happened at Eastmart Kitengela. What does this have on the business community? Well, 3 billion a day is lost. That is the cost of maandamano. Why are people protesting? The high cost of living, punitive taxes, and electoral reforms. Those are some of the facts and figures that have been forming part of our conversation tonight.